Are Asians the smartest people in the world? The short answer is no, but it sure seems that way sometimes. This video isn't about biology or innate racial traits. It's about the sociology that creates the illusion of brain superiority of the model minority in the West. But before anyone said model minority, Hollywood actually painted Asians as yellow-faced caricatures. Then, almost overnight, America rebranded Asians as whiz kids. You didn't have to say Asians are smart, the culture said it for you. The numbers sure look that way. Higher SATs, elite college admissions, and in Silicon Valley, about 45% of tech workers are Asian, despite being just 6% of the US population. Everything seems to prove what many people quietly believe. Asians are just smarter.
Wow, you must be very smart. Good for you.
I'm John, a PhD sociologist, and I spent months digging into PISA data, admissions, and income data to test the myth. And here's what I found. The truth isn't about some mystical Asian brain advantage. It's about three powerful social forces that make it look like super intelligence. But there's a twist. The Asian edge actually isn't permanent, and the human cost can be brutal. In the next few minutes, I'm going to unpack all of this for you. Stick around to the end because that last point will make everything make sense. Quick scope note. Like most videos on my channel, when I say Asian, I'm mostly talking about East Asians because those are the ones that are most tied to the stereotype in North America. South Asians are a major story too, but the pipelines are different enough that they deserve their own spotlight. So with that said, let's talk about what we mean when we say smart. Intelligence can mean many things: creativity, emotional insight, problem solving, etc. But in real life, when people say someone is smart, they usually mean who actually gets ahead. So for this video, I'm going to be very specific. I'm looking at three things: tests, degrees, and dollars. On tests, Asian American high schoolers average around 1,230 on their SATs. White students are closer to 1,100, Hispanic students around 960, and Black students are around 930. That's a gap of over 100 points compared to whites and close to 300 points compared to some other groups. On degrees, roughly 6 in 10 Asian adults in the US have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared with about 4 in 10 adults overall. For advanced degrees, such as master's, PhD, or professional, we're talking about double the rate of white Americans. On income, Asian households lead the nation with a median income of around $122,000 versus $89,000 for white households. In STEM and tech, Asians often earn 25% more than their white peers, and that's according to Pew data. And this looks like it's going to keep up in the future. You just need to look at the recent team photos of the US Math Olympiad. It's basically a wall of East and South Asian faces. If you put all this together, it's easy to see why people quietly conclude Asians are just smarter. But numbers like these are measuring a very specific thing. Most of what we call Asian intelligence is really school performance, learned skills, relentless training, and a heavy dose of cultural pressure. It's like saying marathon runners are the fastest people on earth because they dominate long-distance races. Put them in a 100-meter sprint, and sprinters will destroy them. In the same way, East Asian and Asian American students are world-class at the kind of book smarts our systems reward. But there are lots of other kinds of smart. The important part is what the pattern points to. These numbers aren't proof of a mystical Asian brain. They're clues about systems, selection effects, and the human cost of turning education into a pressure cooker. And quick plug, if you want more cultural deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe. To understand why some Asian students study like their lives depend on it, you have to go back to places where school really did feel like survival. I'm going to focus on Korea and China more because those two are the biggest pipelines feeding into Asian American achievement in the West, or at least the perception of it. First, Korea. After the Korean War, the country was in ruins. In 1960, income per person was about US $79 to $158 a year, which is poorer than most of sub-Saharan Africa at the time. Korea didn't have oil or huge resource wealth, so it had to bet on one thing that it could scale: education. In just a few decades, it went from agrarian backwater to the world's top 12 economies. Then came the 1997 IMF crisis. Korea's economy collapsed almost overnight, and unemployment skyrocketed. But there was a pattern in who survived after the carnage. Those with advanced degrees, technical skills, and educational credentials had options. Everyone else was expendable.
정말 진짜 억울하다 진짜.
If you grow up watching that happen, school stops being about finding yourself. In a country with a thin safety net and intense competition, academic failure isn't just disappointing, it feels catastrophic. Today, this legacy continues with the Sunong, the infamous National College Entrance Exam. While the modern era Sunong as we know it started in 1994, brutal university exams actually started as early as the 1950s, right after the Korean War. China took the same idea and scaled it to a billion-person society. The Gaokao is a single annual high-stakes university entrance exam that can decide whether you stay stuck or move up. Do well and you have a shot at a top university and a middle-class life. Do poorly, and for many students, especially from the rural areas, that door may be shut for good forever. And the competition isn't just your classmates, it's literally everyone taking the test that year across China, which is around 13 million teenagers sitting the exam in recent years. That's more people taking one test than the entire population of Belgium or Portugal. In other words, these aren't just tests, they're academic Squid Games. The cultural response to these exams was systemic and brutal. In Korea, cram schools called hagwons grew into a parallel education system. A typical student might do regular school from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., grab a quick dinner, and then head to hagwon classes to run into the night. In Seoul, they literally had to pass a 10 p.m. curfew law on hagwons to stop all-nighters. And the price really can add up. Some families pour double-digit percentages of their household income into this shadow system just to keep their kids in the race. Japan built its own version, called the Juku. Same idea. After a full day of school, you go sit in another set of classrooms so you don't fall behind on entrance exams like the common test for university admissions. Similarly, China took this logic and scaled it to 1 billion people. Before the 2021 crackdowns, the private tutoring industry was well worth over $100 billion. The biggest cram school instructors became superstar tutors, pulling in 7-figure incomes teaching exam hacks. I know this firsthand because some of them are actually my friends from Oxford and Penn, and they tell me about their experiences in the industry. After the government stepped in, the industry shrank on paper. In reality, though, it just moved underground. It's still running today.
Humanity's evil.
I'm not fundamentally against cram schools. Drilling, repetition, and test-taking strategies can absolutely boost performance on tests. But these systems aren't designed to produce better thinkers per se. They're designed to produce better test takers. It's education Darwinism. Survival depends on how well you game a very specific and very artificial set of challenges. The psychological toll of this parallel tutor system is enormous. South Korea has one of the highest suicide rates in the developed world, and among teens, academic pressures show up again and again as a major factor. I did a whole video on this, so you can check it out here if you want the deep dive. In China, Gaokao season is so intense that schools and local governments open special counseling hotlines and mental health programs just to keep students from melting down under the pressure. And it's common to hear about families talking about the kids who can't eat, can't sleep, or burst into tears at the sight of practice tests. In Japan, you get futoko, literally meaning school refusal. These are students who become so overwhelmed by school stress, bullying, or anxiety that they simply stop going to class for months at a time. And yet, by the metrics that the system cares about, it works. On international tests like PISA, the global exam for 15-year-olds in math, reading, and science, Singapore, which is about 75% Chinese, and East Asian systems repeatedly dominate the top of the tables. In the 2022 PISA, Singapore scored 575 in math, far ahead of the OECD average, while places like Macau, Japan, and Korea also sit in the high 500s and 500 plus range. The US, by comparison, scored 465 in math. This is Confucian grinding taken to its logical extreme. The belief that if you just put in enough disciplined effort, you can brute force your way through any exam. Families who win in this environment end up organizing their entire lives around academic achievement. Almost every decision runs through one filter. Will this help my child's performance? School life, hobbies, and even family time all get pushed aside for another worksheet, another mock test, another hour with a tutor. And when these families immigrate to Western countries, they don't suddenly drop that mindset at the airport. They bring it with them. After all, it's the playbook that got them out in the first place.
I don't like change.
But here's the key point for this video. That pressure cooker culture is only part of the story. Another part is who actually manages to leave. The families who make it to the West aren't just random samples. They're the hyper-selected survivors. When you look at Asian success in the West, you're not looking at a random sample of Asia. You're looking at people who made it through a very narrow door. Think about what it actually takes to legally move from East Asia to places like the US or Canada. Immigration systems heavily reward education, skills, and money. On the one side, you have investor and golden visa programs, where the minimum buy-in is often hundreds of thousands of dollars to around $1 million in capital. On the other side, you have skilled worker and professional visas that privilege advanced degrees, in-demand occupations, and clean work histories. Both routes select people who have already shown that they can succeed. That's classic brain drain for the sending countries and brain gain for the receiving ones. Poorer countries lose a chunk of their best educated and most ambitious people, while rich countries import them as proven talent.
Because we're not smart enough.
A family immigrating from East Asia might spend tens of thousands on visas, legal fees, and relocation on top of having enough savings to survive months or even years before they fully land on their feet. Only families with deep enough pockets and connections can even attempt this process. And I know this firsthand because I grew up in a neighborhood in Toronto that told many of these stories. But there's also more layers beyond money. You're also selecting on mindset and environment. People who clear these hurdles tend to be unusually driven, organized, and risk-tolerant. And their kids grow up in an enriched environment. We're talking about books at home, private computers, private lessons, and educated networks. And parents who already know how to play the system and are highly motivated to push their kids through them. Some people might want to reach for a genetics explanation, but we really don't need it. Most of the gaps that you see in test scores and credentials come down to inputs and environments. Think about something simple like height. Who your parents are matters, but nutrition and living conditions can literally move the needle by inches. Academic performance works the same way. The takeaway isn't born superior, it's that people who make it through the immigration filter often land in or build unusually achievement-friendly environments for their kids. You can see the same logic in health. Researchers call it the healthy immigrant effect. Newcomers often arrive healthier than the average person in the destination country. It's expensive, stressful, and full of hurdles, so the process tends to select for people who can plan and stick to that plan under pressure. Those same habits can show up in everyday routines that keep people healthy too. More structure, more self-control, more consistency of sleep, diet, and exercise. It's really not magic. Sociologist Annette Lareau calls this kind of middle-class parenting concerted cultivation. Kids don't just go to school and come home. Their schedules are filled with organized activities, constant adult coaching, and parents who step in, email teachers, and negotiate with institutions on their behalf. And when you zoom in on Asian American families, you see a turbocharged version of this. Sociologists Jennifer Lee and Min Zhou, in their book The Asian American Achievement Paradox, show how hyper-selective immigrant parents bring over their own success scripts that include intense study routines, high expectations, and a dense network of ethnic after-school programs and tutors. Together, they build an ecosystem around their kids and make high achievement feel normal.
I'm Asian. You guys Asian?
It's not only happening in individual families. Asian immigrant churches, temples, and community centers act like strategy hubs. Parents swap intel on which schools, tutors, and extracurriculars max out their children's chances. At church, an older Chinese uncle will literally walk a younger uncle through the exact steps his kid took to get into med school to be a neurosurgeon. Sociologists call this social capital, networks that share resources and information, plus a shared belief that education is the safest path in an uncertain world. And they keep on reinforcing this idea in their community. For them, this isn't a new concept. It's exactly the same formula back in the motherland that I described earlier. All of these factors, immigration law, money, middle-class parenting, and tight-knit communities, come together to create what researchers call the Asian immigrant advantage. But here's where it gets interesting. The Asian immigrant advantage doesn't last forever. It fades. Sociologists find a clear pattern across generations. The first generation are the parents who immigrated, and the kids who come over as children are often called the 1.5 generation. The second generation are the first kids born in the West. First and second generation Asian Americans tend to outpace white students in grades and college enrollment. By the third generation, however, the grandkids, the advantage often fizzles out, and they often look a lot like the white average. That isn't because later generations are simply less capable, it's because they're living in a different world. They grow up with more options, they're less locked into tight-knit ethnic bubbles, and they get less of that "if you fail this exam, your life is over" energy that their grandparents carried out of Asia. But Stephen He emotional damage jokes
Emotional damage
are still funny, but for a lot of third-gen kids, they're more of a meme than a lived reality. But not all Asians are the same. Just look at the contrast between different Asian groups. Families who arrive through skilled worker programs consistently outperform refugees or those who immigrated through family reunification. Vietnamese Bo people who fled the Vietnam War in the 70s show different achievement patterns than Vietnamese professionals who immigrated later through merit-based systems. Even inside a single country, the differences can be huge. Take China. The parents who can seriously consider sending a kid to the West are usually based in the big cities where the money is and where the best schools, consultants, and cram tutors cluster. Rural families, which still make up a large part of China, face much tougher odds unless their child is an absolute standout and lands serious financial aid. Remember, we're talking about a Gaokao system where over 13 million students sit the exam each year, and the most prestigious universities have acceptance rates down to around a fraction of a percent for international student quotas. For tiny slices of students who are both at the very top of that pile and competitive for funded slots abroad, it's like it's not enough to be the #1 student in just your school, but you need to be the #1 across dozens of schools put together. Now imagine trying to clear that bar coming from a rural farming community. So when you see Asian dominance at a US school, remember this isn't a random slice of Asia. It's the children of hyper-selective parents who have already cleared massive financial, educational, and migration hurdles just to show up. And that matters because their exceptional performance often gets misunderstood. When I was teaching at international schools in Korea, I kept hearing a lazy line from some Western teachers. Asian students are smart and driven, but they lack creativity.
James won the blue grand defeat, Mamo.
Yes, competition in Asia is brutal, and there's a well-known formula for grinding away to the top scores. But the idea that Asian education systems only produce test takers and not thinkers doesn't survive contact with reality. If they only churned out mindless exam machines, you wouldn't see K-pop and K-dramas go global, Nintendo and anime rewiring youth culture worldwide, or China build a world-class infrastructure and competing with the US in consumer drones and AI. You don't get that level of cultural and technological impact without some serious creative and analytical firepower. Now let's put all this together. Pressure cooker education, immigration selection, and skill optimization, and you get a formula that makes Asian intellectual superiority look natural when it's actually systemic. But here's where it gets dangerous. Labels act like gravity. This is a classic Pygmalion effect, and the name comes from a Greek myth. Pygmalion was a sculptor who chiseled his ideal woman out of ivory, fell in love with his own creation, and then treated the statue as if she was real. He prayed to the goddess Aphrodite to give him a wife like his sculpture, and in the story, the statue actually comes to life. His belief literally shapes reality. In psychology, the Pygmalion effect is the idea that higher expectations can lead to better results. And it doesn't just apply to students, it applies to teachers too. In Rosenthal and Jacobson's classic study, teachers were told that certain kids were intellectual bloomers. These kids ended up doing better, partly because teachers unconsciously invested more time, attention, and encouragement in them. You can see a similar logic in Jane Elliott's famous blue eyes and brown eyes exercise. She told blue-eyed kids that they were smarter and gave them more privileges, and as a result, they became more confident and performed better, while the brown-eyed kids did worse. It's controversial in a very 1960s experiment, which is actually my favorite era. It shows how quickly labels become self-fulfilling for everyone involved.
He's beginning to believe.
I know Kung Fu.
Now apply that to Asians are naturally smart. When society labels Asians as the model minority, that tag can pull some students up while crushing others who don't fit the mold with internal and external costs. The internal cost is psychological. I once had a student with straight A's, perfect SAT, piano prodigy. She broke into tears over a B+ in IB history. Her experience reflected a kind of stereotype boost, a positive stereotype that can raise performance, but it also raises the stakes. You're expected to excel, so any imperfection feels like proof that something is wrong with you. And that's how a flattering label can backfire and cause many Asian students to quietly spiral into anxiety or depression. The external costs are just as serious. When we treat Asian as a single monolithic category, we ignore huge differences within the group. The success of highly selected immigrants from countries like China and Korea gets projected onto all Asians, including Southeast Asian refugees who arrive under completely different circumstances. Take the Hmong, Cambodian, and Laotian communities. Many families fled war and persecution, arrived with very little schooling, and still struggle with poverty and education. In some of these groups, lots of adults lack a high school diploma, and numbers look nothing like the Chinese or Korean Americans. But policies backed by sci-fi data that lumps everyone into one Asian box can make their struggles invisible. A Laotian student from a low-income family ends up statistically grouped with a child of a Chinese software engineer at Microsoft getting paid 300 grand a year, even though they face completely different obstacles and don't have the same access to tutoring, networks, and familiarity with navigating the school system.
You're a Navy SEAL with a degree from Harvard Medical School.
Dr. Jonathan Kim.
That's just ridiculous.
By model minority standards, he's the perfect outcome. He was born in LA to Korean immigrant parents who ran a small liquor store, and his father had little formal education, working 6 hours a week.
My father had a lot of demons. I think he did the best he could to live with those demons, but a lot of times he didn't have the mental strength to really not let those demons get a hold.
If you go past the headlines and the memes and into his interviews, he talks about his father being shot by police after threatening the family with a gun. And I'll be honest, like most people, I first saw him as a meme. This impossibly accomplished Asian guy you're supposed to feel bad comparing yourself to. It was only later that I realized how much pain sits under that perfect story. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because the model minority myth erases people who are struggling at the bottom and flattens people who seem invincible at the top. In both cases, the label hides what's really going on. The whole point of this video is to move away from a story about genetics and individual merit and towards a story about systems, policy, and human cost. Once we see that Asian intelligence is mostly the product of immigration selection and Asia's approach to education built around survival, we can have a more honest conversation about what these patterns actually mean. Instead of asking which group is naturally smarter, we can ask what conditions are producing these outcomes. And that question leads to better policy and more realistic expectations for everyone. And looking forward, even these dynamics are changing. As Asian countries grow richer, their school systems are slowly shifting away from pure test optimization towards more balanced models. The rise of AI and robotics will only speed this up. When machines can handle more of the routine, testable work that these systems are so good at producing, the premium shifts to things humans do best: creativity, emotional intelligence, and complex problem solving. So smart isn't a fixed trait that some groups have and others don't. What looks like innate brilliance is mostly the product of cultural history, selected immigration, and generations of families who treated education as a survival strategy. That raises a bigger question. If our systems can shape the kind of intelligence that gets rewarded, what kind of intelligence do we actually want to be building next? Because the world that rewards test scores and paper credentials is already shifting. As AI and robotics take over more routine and testable work, the skills that matter will tilt towards the human ones: creativity, empathy, and adaptability. The very things that pressure cooker systems tend to sideline. But maybe the real challenge isn't proving who's the smartest, it's redefining what smart even means in the first place. If you like this video, you might like this one. If you want more data-driven cultural deep dives like this, like and hit subscribe.